The word I use is hubris, our word for arrogance that scrapes the stars.
I don't think I have seen a show as universally panned as Velma has been in a very long time. Which is weird because it's not really the worst thing I've ever seen. Like, don't get me wrong, it's not good. You should get a look at the notes I took watching the first few episodes. But once I forced myself to get through them, it got slowly less terrible, which is more than can be said for a lot of other shows. Or maybe I just watched enough of it to kickstart the process of habituation, and my brain was able to start blocking the bad stuff out to protect me from the experience. I'm not sure. Either way, Velma is not great. Not even good. Not the worst thing I've ever seen, and I kind of feel like the reaction got a little blown out of proportion a bit at some point, but it's just objectively not good. And while there will be a discussion of the myriad of reasons behind why it was not good, because I didn't make myself sit through all these episodes for nothing, I need to get something out of this or I will lose my mind. I feel like it's a weird pattern that I've seen in storytelling recently. Movies, TV, books, etc. Well, I say recently, I don't mean recently, just a weird pattern I've seen in general. There's this thing where someone will make something really good or something well received enough to allow them to establish themselves, and then their work will do like a complete 180. There could obviously be a lot of reasons for that in general. The beauty of art is the diversity in its creation and how the process will always be different each time, yielding different results and different reactions. And even in terms of what we perceive as bad, quote unquote bad, nothing is unequivocally bad for literally everyone. Someone out there will always enjoy the work you hate, and vice versa. But beyond all that, there seems to be a thing that happens when people establish themselves a bit too much. Which is a really weird sentence to say, since as artists what you want to do is establish yourself in your field, but occasionally that seems to backfire on the work itself. This video essay is going to be a bit different than the ones I've made so far. A lot of it is going to have to rely on my opinion and my take on things, because I tried to do academic research on the topic and got absolutely nothing. I tried so many search terms and just nothing came up. Which is understandable. I don't really think this is a topic you can do much peer-reviewed research on. It's kind of always going to be reliant on your own opinion and your own perception of certain works and the people behind them. So instead, I read a couple of essays by Oscar Wilde. So those are what I'm going to be pulling a few quotes from. It's not academic research per se, but he is very smart. And he's literally one of my favorite authors. And he says like a lot of things better than I ever could. Well, he says everything better than I ever could, but like pertaining to this essay. Okay, so now, all that being said, let's talk about Velma for a bit and justify my suffering. Like I said, and like everyone already said, Velma is just truly not good. And it has nothing to do with the diversity, which I appreciate actually, or any of the things that seem to make people predisposed to hate it. I think Velma is not good for the absolute worst reason that something can be criticized for. It's not good because the work itself is not good. And I feel like this show set a record for losing me the fastest out of any show ever has, because in the opening lines, I was already ready to tap out.
Sure. Normally, origin stories are about tall, handsome guys struggling with the burden of being handed even more power.
It doesn't work. It's somehow both too self-aware and not nearly aware enough. When it wants to make a point, it just decides to shove it down your throat in the most uninspired, over-the-top way possible. And one of the worst things it does is that it takes this existing IP, these characters that are already established, that people already love, and kinda rips them to shreds. They are so unlikable in this, so far from the characters we know them as. And to me, I just feel like if we're doing an origin story, its success is contingent on respecting the material that people are fans of to begin with. This has nothing to do with changing the race or maybe like changing minor character traits or whatever else, but completely ripping a character to shreds in the opening episode just so you can build them back up throughout the show to get them to the characters we already know and love from the original material seems like a really odd tactic, because I don't enjoy them. I did not enjoy them throughout the show, the way the show decided to present them. I don't enjoy like douchebag Fred, who's also like in jail for murder. Yeah, he didn't come out of it like, and also mind-numbingly stupid. I don't enjoy bitchy Daphne. I am kind of fine with Shaggy in this. I don't know why, but of all of them, I enjoy Velma the absolute least. This is not even in the script, but I just need to point out that I disliked Velma so much in this show that every single time a character seemed to like her or have feelings for her, my immediate reaction was, why? Which I feel like you don't really want that. Anyway. And I get it. You need a character trajectory, you need character growth. There had to be something wrong with them. But I don't know, I just feel like the show went about it completely the wrong way. Had these been new characters we are being introduced to from scratch, ones where we have no pre-existing ties to their personalities and camaraderie and friendship, then sure, this wouldn't be an issue. There would have been 100 other issues with the show, but this specific one wouldn't be as much of a hang-up. But I remember while I was watching it, the whole time I was just completely baffled by what they decided to do to these beloved characters. And I think this is what the point of this video will come down to. Because there are so many other issues with the show, and there are going to be so many countless issues with the other properties I'm going to discuss in a minute. But to me, the main problem is that such a huge chunk of the critiques levied against them feel so obvious. They feel like things that should have been pointed out super early on in the writing process or in the creating process. They feel like things that anyone with an objective eye could have and should have picked up on. So why didn't they? Why was all that money spent, all this effort expended, all this work put into things that had such glaring issues on a foundational level? I mean, I obviously don't have like a straightforward answer, or else I'd be a TV exec and I wouldn't be making YouTube videos on like a 7-year-old computer. But I feel like there might be a noticeable connection between some of these. So let's talk about Fantastic Beasts now. Because of the year I was born, I tend to often be categorized as a cusper in our arbitrary generational divide, meaning I toe the line between Gen Z and being a millennial. And I think the most millennial thing about me is my love for Harry Potter and how much of my childhood was shaped by those books. Harry Potter was my favorite book series, my favorite movie series, my favorite part of Universal, my favorite everything. I was primed. I was the perfect candidate to love Fantastic Beasts just for the sake of it. And I just did not. And not to put too much regard into my own opinion, but I really feel like that's a problem. If the people who already had so much love in their heart for this property and this franchise can't be incentivized enough to transfer it over to the new material we're getting, then something is drastically wrong with this new material. My criticisms of Fantastic Beasts here, while they will fall on J.K. Rowling, as is the point of the entire video, they will deal entirely with the effects on the writing and the execution of the movies themselves, not with anything else. I could say a lot about her character outside of her work, but I won't. While J.K. Rowling seems to aggressively not believe in the death of the author as an approach to her writing, and honestly sometimes I don't either, but like for different reasons, I will prescribe to the notion of completely omitting the author's outside behavior from this discussion, just for the sake of focusing on the particular issue the video is about. There are countless other brilliant videos on all the other stuff, ones that I can't recommend enough, but I will definitely leave them linked in the description for further perusing. Now that that's out of the way, the problem with Fantastic Beasts is the writing. Through and through. It's not just the most glaring issue, it's pretty much the only issue. The acting is great, the CGI is great, they had budget, cinematography, directing, even scoring is great. But the writing was mediocre at best, befuddling and convoluted at worst. The writing in the first movie is not terrible, but in hindsight, it's not nearly strong enough to set the foundation for an entire new saga either, with new characters and new plots. And I feel like none of that even really matters because the first movie gets so disregarded in terms of everything. Like, it was already kind of mediocre while watching it, but you watched it expecting things to ramp up. Not everything can be Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, and that's alright, as long as we have a Chamber of Secrets or Prisoner of Azkaban, which is the best Harry Potter movie, fight me, in the works. But we did not. Instead, we got Jaws the Revenge. I couldn't think of a bad sequel. This is the only one I could come up with. The follow-ups were so much worse to an already kind of lackluster opener. The story got so befuddled and convoluted and ridiculous, which is already bad enough for a movie series with this much hype around it. One that was literally set up for success in every way. But it gets so much worse when we realize that these are all things describing the writing of one of the most successful authors of our modern times. And true, success does not mean artistic credibility, obviously. And something being successful does not mean it's good. But listen, Harry Potter was good. It may not have been like a technical masterpiece, and looking back you can definitely find like some glaring plot holes, and there's definitely some issues with the representation, but literally all of that aside, it was good. It was good for what it is, amongst the best in its class. It captivated us, it got so many kids into reading, and the movie adaptations were honestly incredible. Like, they were so good that I feel like we take for granted how bad they could have been until we look at something like Divergent being adapted and realize that a solid and successful adaptation of these wildly popular and culture-defining books was in no way guaranteed. Harry Potter did so many things right, and a lot of them had to do with the writing and the world that was created, because the attachment to the story started with the books for a lot of people. So it's just so much more baffling that from the person who created all that, with her at the helm, with the whole world at her whim, she managed to deliver something so disappointing. It's not the worst movie ever. It's not the worst movie franchise ever. I don't think that was ever in question. But to call it like just a disappointment and a downgrade from where we were coming from would be a huge understatement. Like, I can't overstate how much I never even thought of the possibility that this would be bad when I went in to watch the first one. I had so much faith in her writing. I didn't even question anything about the setup. I didn't even complain when the first one felt kind of mediocre. I was so sure it would deliver at the end. I was so certain she was onto something because I trusted her writing so wholeheartedly. And then the second one came out and I just wow, who wrote that? What the hell happened, Joanne? Once again, I can never for certain ascertain what happened on sets that I wasn't on, and with projects that I was not involved with, and most importantly, in the minds of writers in general. A lot of shit happens up there. And sometimes there are basically no outside circumstances, and the weird decisions all happen in the writer's head. But this feels like it sits with Velma for the same reason that I am making this whole video. And that's why I wanted it included here. Because for as much as I think Velma is a good example, I feel like nothing is a better example of the effect of hubris on art, like the Fantastic Beasts franchise. This may be my most controversial section of this video, so I'm not going to linger for too long on it, although I wrote the script for this video before reviews for The Idol came out, so it might be less controversial now that we're all just unanimously not into his shit. But I think Euphoria Season 2 very much falls under the category of letdowns in terms of writing. And that's why I keep stressing that success and numbers are not what I'm trying to discuss here. I'm just addressing the quality of the writing itself. Euphoria really suffered a massive dive in writing quality in Season 2, especially when it comes to the character building, and especially compared to how strong Season 1 really was. And the thing about Season 2 is it was still kind of entertaining. It was like a cultural moment, watching it, live tweeting it, keeping up with the references the following week. It was fun, and it was something that TV has been missing for a while. But I feel like all that may have played a hand in hiding how inconsistent and sometimes just straight up lazy the writing got. It felt a lot more plot driven and lost the strong characterizations that it did such a good job building in Season 1. And once again, this feels like such a jarring departure from what made the first season so good, from what made it work so well, which is the most important part. I feel like had this been the first season, the show would not have had the reception it did get, and it would not have been so set up for success in the second season. So that's the thing. I feel like one thing that unites the three of these the most is that they were utter and complete letdowns. They were not necessarily bad if compared to other works that are genuinely shoddy. They were just disappointing. Some of them extremely disappointing. But the emotion that unites them the most is disappointment. Jesus Christ, did I not have a thesaurus? It's everyone collectively expecting better, and then watching the work, especially the writing, trip into pitfalls that you would think it would be above, that you thought have already been hammered out. And the question becomes, with works of this size, this much anticipation, this much build-up, and this many people involved in every aspect of them, how do such obvious oversights slip through so often? Which brings me to kind of the point of the video. Without the critical faculty, there is no artistic creation at all worthy of the name. Obviously, issues with art are not exclusively tied to hubris, and people who are artists do sometimes, often, have visions that may be too grand for the people around them to understand. And as a writer myself, I am very much not advocating for making sure writers get the approval of everyone around them before they deem their work ready to present to the public. I just noticed that there's a recurring theme, this recurring issue, with people who establish themselves so well, so solidly, so unequivocally with a work, or several, and then what follows it suffers immensely, not in spite of that, but seemingly because of their previous success. J.K. Rowling would have probably not been allowed to take over the scriptwriting process of such a huge franchise with no prior scriptwriting experience had she not been J.K. Rowling. And I am all for being assertive with your property and your art, especially with women, gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss, and all that. But at what point does assertiveness and confidence veer into dangerous territory, into hubris? Because that's what the issue was here. She took on this huge undertaking and clearly refused any help until everything was a massive shit show. And that was when someone was brought along to help her with the script. And despite it not recovering from the blow Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald and its convoluted and messy writing dealt to the franchise as a whole, The Secrets of Dumbledore actually does have generally better reception. People acknowledge that it's much better. It's just not good enough to save a sinking ship when so much damage had already been done. They not only let her sink the ship, she let herself sink the ship. I think the mess that was Fantastic Beasts and its storytelling would have been so much more easily accepted in a book. Harry Potter had a lot of messy and convoluted and kind of over-the-top twists and storylines in the books, that the act of actively consuming a book allowed the reader to digest slowly and process them. That does not work with movies. In Harry Potter, most things that would have prompted this kind of reaction from the audience was cleaned up in the script writing process, done by actual scriptwriters who knew more about the amount of overwriting an audience watching a movie is generally willing to handle, versus readers consuming a book, which are two vastly different things. But J.K. Rowling is so powerful with her IP. And like, good for her, she built it herself and all, but she literally sank an entire franchise because she thought she could tackle a whole new mode of writing herself and then just kind of completely fucked it up. Someone I often think of as almost a rebuttal to all my complaints about J.K. Rowling writing the script for Fantastic Beasts herself is Gillian Flynn. She wrote the script for Gone Girl herself and did it absolutely masterfully. But to me, it's very different. Getting all your thoughts written out into an actual book and then getting the chance to adapt that into a movie and knowing what should be included in the movie and what should be cut out versus just going from writing books straight to writing multi-movie massive franchises with no proper prior experience, those are different things. I actually found this interview that kind of corroborates everything I say about Gillian Flynn here. I found that after I wrote the script. I did like some extra research after. She, like, all she asked for was to write the first draft of the script, and then David Fincher read it and like really liked it. She also studied screenplays for a really long time before this. I'm gonna link the interview down below and I'm gonna put some screenshots on screen. I'm assuming I'm doing that right now. But yeah, I felt like that supported everything I was saying here. Anyway, back to the video. My other thought regarding that is that some people are just better at things than others are, to be honest. Gillian Flynn knew how to trim the fat, how to make an exceptionally tight and well-done script out of her book. And I don't think J.K. Rowling really has that same prowess. I'm also sure Gillian Flynn got outside input that was probably really helpful and was incorporated into her script writing process. She did. This is based on my follow-up research. Yes, she did. And while I'm positive J.K. Rowling gets feedback and input on all her work, I'm not entirely sure how useful that would be to someone like her, someone as established and massive as her. How honest are people, really, with her, and how much is their input valued? Because based on what came out with Fantastic Beasts, it seems like the input is not that reliable. And that is another part of the problem, I believe. At what point do people hold back their honest criticism, their valuable input as fresh eyes, ones not too blinded by their work on a project to see the flaws in it? How established do you have to be before the input of those around you starts to become a cacophony of praise, undisturbed by dissenting voices or honest feedback? Because I always think that about quote-unquote bad art, or things that objectively come out not great. But here it is so much more obvious because the more established you are, the bigger the projects you will be trusted with. But it's never really solitary work. So many people work on these huge projects. There are so many stages of development, and so many eyes, and so much input that massive flaws with the very foundation of a work should be getting caught early. Yet so often they're just made worse. Like, Mindy Kaling didn't even write Velma. Most of the issues with it, especially the mediocre, bordering on cringe jokes, the weird way they land, and like the weird tone of the show in general, those don't feel like they're on her. But the problem with Velma is that it's flawed at its very concept. So much of what is wrong with it should have been stopped pretty early on. And as an executive producer, it is easy to see a lot of that as being her work. Especially the weird character arcs that the show hinges on. It feels like they were decided in another echo chamber, where someone with status or power or impact suggested like a kind of iffy idea, and no one was able to really openly call out why it's bad, and so things ended up snowballing from there. I am very much speculating here. I was not in that writer's room, but I feel like we see a pattern where these blatant errors that, again, we assume would be caught early when so many people are working on a project, exist and happen largely at a place where someone super established and hard to criticize is at the helm. With Velma, it's at the show's core. The flawed ideas are at the very center of the concept of the show in and of itself. And that's where the most famous name involved in its creation has the most impact. With Fantastic Beasts, it's with the script and its execution. And that's again where the most famous name is in control. I could be very wrong, and Mindy Kaling might not have anything to do with the bad decisions the show decided to make from the very jump, but in her position, she must have had a lot of influence on decisions like this, especially as some of them follow certain patterns that are already established in her other works. And that also applies to Euphoria. Sam Levinson wrote every single episode of season 2. Usually, when one writer gets the chance to be this in control of a work of television, you can expect to have pretty consistent characterization and quality. That's like the one benefit. Think of Fleabag. Phoebe Waller-Bridge is so specific and intentional with her work and her tone and her characterization that it makes the fact that she writes it all herself very much worth it. It turns it into one of the strongest aspects of the show. But that's not what happened with season 2 of Euphoria. Sam Levinson was also completely in charge in season 1, which to me was leagues and bounds above season 2 in writing and character development. But that illustrates my point perfectly. Season 1's success seems to have impacted the writer's perception of his work and his output and the input he should be taking. In Euphoria, there are no particular issues like the past 2 examples, I guess. There's issues, it's just not something I can define in one sentence. It was more of a downward slope. It just kept getting steeper and steeper till we kind of veer completely off course. And I think that outside input allowed it to be a downward slope rather than a jump off a cliff. While Sam Levinson writes this alone, there seemed to definitely be some input, at least from the actors, on what needs to be toned down and what needs to be trimmed out. And I want to say that helped because I can't imagine what it was before these edits. Actually, yes, I can. Now that The Idol's out, it would have been The Idol. But right now, it at points seems like a power trip. Just someone using these characters to get out certain scenes that he wanted to put on screen and building the rest of the show around that. Again, I want to emphasize, I wrote all this before The Idol even came out at Cannes, so I was spot on. It's not catastrophic, it's just a disappointment at the end, and it largely harms the storytelling. And it appears to be reverberating into his new show, The Idol, which seems to be more of Sam Levinson wanting to create certain dynamics and certain scenes that he, enjoys or something. I don't know him, this isn't what the video is about, his life is his business. I'm only concerned with how it affects his art. And it does affect his art. And some of it was bad enough that the Rolling Stone wrote a whole thing about it. Again, this was all before Cannes. I didn't know everyone else hated it too. But yeah, the Rolling Stone were very valid in what they wrote. And the show honestly kind of sounds horrendous, but it also starts to sound like he's just using it to get what he couldn't do in Euphoria on screen in some other way, on some other show, with some other actors. Again, I don't know him, so who knows why he's making these decisions. All I'm trying to say is that someone should have stopped him. And I guess people just don't do that. Another thing that I feel like could be an example of this, of the notion of people choosing not to step in when they so clearly should have, because the person making the error is too established and successful to be corrected, I have this.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
I feel like I shouldn't even say anything about this, I'm serious, this just speaks for itself. Huge franchise, one of the biggest in existence, huge build-up. Yes, there were issues along the way, which is a discussion for another time. But the fact that so many teams, so many people, and the literal biggest entertainment company in the world just allowed this to happen is always so wild to me to think about. And do not tell me this was the only option. This is writing. There's every option. The whole world, all the galaxies are at your fingertips. Your only limitation is your words and the boundaries of good writing. And this falls so far outside those, it's not even funny. Okay, it's a little funny. I laugh every time I listen to that line. And you know what? I actually don't hate the prequel trilogy, but it could be argued that the prequel trilogy can be an example of the same thing too. It's a follow-up to an insanely successful work that veered extremely off course in a way that makes very little sense. It's the exact same thing. It just seems that when people establish themselves enough, the first thing that they shed, the first advantage they lose, is the honest criticism necessary for the shaping of any work of art. From others around them, or even from themselves. And maybe in some cases, it's through no fault of their own. Maybe their success in and of itself silences dissenting voices that could have course corrected and gotten things back on track. All it takes is one person to notice what's wrong with the work and point it out correctly. To a writer or a creator who is far too involved in their creation to ever have an objective eye when looking at it. And that's not a criticism. You're not meant to look at your art objectively. Then it's not touching you enough. Art is not meant to be created dispassionately. And yeah, sure, you can self-critique, and I do think that's very important, and it also seems to be something that gets lost following success. But more importantly, you need outside eyes. Ones that are not your own, to critique your work for you. And I think this is the biggest issue here. That very concentration of vision that makes a man an artist limits by its sheer intensity his faculty of fine appreciation. The energy of creation hurries him blindly onto his own goal. The wheels of his chariot raise the dust as a cloud around him. The gods are hidden from each other. They can recognize their worshippers. That is all. Oscar Wilde is so dramatic. Once again, I will say this one more time. I was not in these writing rooms or in these meetings. I do not know the way things played out, and everything I said is pure speculation on my part. I just noticed a pattern that kept repeating itself and felt like there was something there. A cautionary tale for artists, for creators who want to continue creating, for people who fear losing sight of what is truly good and beloved about their art, and losing their way, and in turn, losing their passion. But I truly do not believe people suddenly lose their talent. I've always found that to be the least likely culprit in situations like these. Situations where we know someone makes good work. They have proven themselves to us before, probably exceptionally, and yet, it's like their talent vanished overnight. I don't think that's what happens. I don't think that ever happens. I think apprehension, the ability to be self-critical, self-awareness, and either criticism from others or the ability to take criticism from others are what actually disappears and leads to such drastic shifts in quality of work and shifts in what we construe as talent. And you know what? Maybe we inevitably lose a little bit of fire through the commodification of our art and our work, but that's a conversation for another day. I will say that I think a big part of me creating this video is for myself. After all this, I admit that I actually have a really hard time taking criticism to my own work. I have a really hard time watching my writing be edited down or criticized or fixed. I sometimes have the ego of an established artist before even being established. And I like to think that a lot of artists probably feel that way. I'd like to believe I'm not alone. You pour your soul into something, bear it for the world to see, cut yourself and bleed out in the open. You don't want to hear what is wrong with it. That's as personal as an insult can possibly get. But like Oscar Wilde said, if a work of art comes from deep enough within your soul, from a place personal enough, then you will absolutely lack the objectivity to look at it critically, no matter how much of a perfectionist you think you are. And sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes the lack of objectivity adds to your art. But sometimes you simply would be unable to see the edges that stick out unpleasantly from your vantage point. Not the same way someone standing further away can see them. And sometimes you need that. You need that someone to come and tell you what doesn't look as smooth from far away as you thought it did. And at the end of the day, it's impossible to define good art or bad art. It's impossible to bring it down to a specific science. Like I said, I like the prequel trilogy. People have differing opinions on things. They always will. For everything you vehemently hate, there will always be someone who likes it with the same intensity and passion. I'm sure there's someone out there who loves everything I just criticized, and that's okay. We never have to collectively agree on the way we consume and perceive art. I'm glad something worked for you that didn't for me. This wasn't really about that, but that's okay. Art is a passion, and in matters of art, thought is inevitably colored by emotion, and so is fluid rather than fixed, and, depending upon fine moods and exquisite moments, cannot be narrowed into the rigidity of a scientific formula or a theological dogma. It is to the soul that art speaks, and the soul may be made the prisoner of the mind as well as of the body.